Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their timeless and extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. To date, there are over 175 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series and more than 50 Encore episodes. Listen to every hour-long show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen on my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today is an encore episode of my interview with J.S., originally released as episode 76 in May 2022. Jay has been a sober member of AA since May 2003. In today's podcast, my longtime friend J.S. recounts his years of drinking and nearly 19 years of sobriety. Like many AA stories, Jay's foray into alcoholism stemmed from a difficult childhood in a home where his father drank and fear and confusion reigned. By the time he started drinking in his early teens to quell the fear, he had set the pattern for a life of alcoholic behavior. Dishonesty and narcissistic disregard for others both isolated him and caused pain to those who cared about him. As his adult life was rapidly spinning out of control, Jay realized he needed help. He went into treatment and, subsequently, AA. But what started out as a good idea inevitably failed as he continued to drink, paying lip service to both treatment and half-hearted involvement in AA. In fact, as he collected countless desire chips on what seemed to be a weekly basis, he labeled himself a Ph.D. in relapse. Neither pride in nor practice of that degree did much to mitigate Jay's incomprehensible demoralization. As the elevator was plunging towards the bottom, his moment of clarity finally came into focus, and Jay was ready to stop drinking and do the actual work to stay sober. Though Jay's story is hilarious at times and tragic at others, it remains a cautionary tale of what can go wrong in the pursuit of sobriety. Its value as a stark backdrop to Jay's sober life in AA cannot be undervalued. His AA-inspired service work in the community and his no-nonsense approach to sponsoring other men in the program provides solid footing from which Jay can influence the good in other people's lives. His daily commitment to the basics of the program has also made it possible to avoid hitting the potholes in his road of happy destiny. He is both available and approachable to others in a way that encourages his fellows to follow suit. I'm confident you will benefit by listening to this episode of AA Recovery Interviews as we focus the next 65 minutes on my close friend and AA brother, J.S.
I'm Jay, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for joining me on the AA Recovery Interviews podcast. It's been a while since you and I have spent some time together, at least since before the pandemic. And I appreciate you coming in this evening and letting me talk with you, get to know more about your story. Of course, I've heard bits and pieces of it, and trying to put it all together over the years has been interesting, but I don't know that I've ever heard your story beginning to end. And every little piece I hear is intriguing. So now you've been sober, you're coming up on, is it 19 years?
Yes, May 29th will be 19 years. So in my 18th year, consecutive, weekends included.
Yeah, that's great. Now, was that the first time you tried getting sober 18 years ago?
Not even close.
No, really?
Yeah.
When was your first try at getting sober?
Well, my first real attempt was in September of 2002. You know, I'd been living in this little patio home, and the last couple years of drinking just got really dark. I was working in a radio station at that time, which was fantastic for an alcoholic, that's for sure. It was my alcoholic accelerant, but I even was, struggling there.
Struggling with the job?
Well, struggling not being as crazy or crazier than some of those. That's when it just, like, the wheels started falling off for me. Just started missing more work than I was used to. I'd come in the mornings and, people were commenting on my appearance and I'm thinking, well, like, isn't everybody doing one of those things? So I, decided to let everybody know. Well, this is after a Christmas party incident. So I guess you've heard bits and pieces of my story, as you said. You are a part of my story too, by the way. But first year in that job in the radio station, I had a bright idea that I would host a Christmas party for my boss and all my coworkers. I had this, what I thought was a shiny, cool, hip place, and had a huge bar. And, I wanted it to be like my dad's, this huge bar with beautiful glass shelves and the nicest bottles. And anyway, so I started drinking, pre-gaming, of course. Mm-hmm. By the time my coworkers and my boss and everybody got there at 7 or 8, I was already in blackout mode. Next thing I know, it's the following Monday at work. Now, keep in mind, this is 2002, so right. One thing on my gratitude list is there was no social media or Facebook, but Monday morning at work, and I had heard a couple rumblings, mm-hmm. and I knew that I did some stuff that was not good. And sure enough, people were coming by my little desk and looking at me and laughing and kind of just keep on walking. And, now keep in mind, the people in radio are big personalities and love to party, so I'm like, well, aren't I like everybody else? But the looks they were giving me. And finally, I was waiting on this one buddy who was there that I knew he would tell me the truth. And, he finally gets in. He's like, you don't remember any of that? You don't remember what you're doing? I'm like, I might need a little help with that. There was a movie out there called Almost Famous. And the big part of that movie is the lead singer of the rock and roll band gets on the roof naked and jumps off into the pool. So apparently I decided to recreate that in front of my staff and my boss and everybody else. And I got naked up on my roof. And that did help explain why, underwear was hanging on the fence at one point. But it's sort of funny, but that incomprehensible demoralization, I just felt that to my absolute core.
When he told you this?
Yeah, when I figured out what it was. And I had heard that one of the sales assistants had a camera and she took photos, and I'm like, oh God, and I had done that my whole life, just, crazy stuff. And then I just laughed it off oh, well, it was a party. It was this, it was that. And I had this realization that I'm even crazier than this crazy bunch now. And that was kind of the beginning of the end in terms of a very dark period for me, because after that, what I told everybody was, well, I'm going to, I'm just going to get healthier and work out and not go out to happy hours. The reality was, Howard, I just wanted to go home and just drink.
So you went underground.
I went underground. And, so I did that for as long as I could.
You mentioned earlier about having done crazy stuff all your life, and I'm curious where the behavior when you were drunk came from. Was that an earlier time in your life before pre-alcohol? Tell me about your family of origin. What was it like growing up in your home?
Yeah, I would say probably always had the propensity to, do outlandish things. So I was the oldest of 4. Uh-huh. And, my dad, who, I still don't know to this day if he was an alcoholic, if he was or he wasn't. I'm not supposed to label, but I will just say he had every single characteristic that came along with that. When he wasn't drinking, it was restless, irritable, and discontent. Mm. And, I came from a large family of social animals, knew I'd have a good time.
Did you notice that when you were a little kid? I mean, was this happening when you were a child that you noticed that going on?
Yeah, well, I did notice that, there wasn't a lot of happiness in the house, and when my dad was there, he was just usually angry about something. And my mom, trying to raise 4 kids, was, in a tough spot herself. And the only time there was really joy, seemingly, was, on the weekends or after work. Sometimes my dad's buddies or my uncle would come by and, they'd have some beers. Mm-hmm. And, then there was a little bit of laughter and stuff and that kind of thing.
So did you equate the laughter and the booze? I mean, did you look forward to him having the beer with his friends so you could at least hear him laugh and have a good time?
In a sense, yes, because I knew that's where I could, joke around a little bit. Uh-huh. just kind of be okay. Because before, when it wasn't that time, it was like everything I was doing, it was wrong and always getting screamed and yelled at. And for anybody who knew my dad's dad, that's where a lot of that came from. And I think my dad did the best he could, but a lot of that stuff just came right down the line. My dad was also the oldest of 4 children. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of repeated itself, I guess, and just came right down. And, a couple things, and it's interesting because, I've been doing a lot of work on this just the past couple years, and me 10 years ago probably would have said, oh, yeah, it was a little tough, but everything was fine. Kind of find everything really wasn't fine. There was just a lot of stuff that, that came with being the number one son and the direct hit, for someone who might not have wanted to have kids at that early age. I identified with the troublemaker. I remember them saying like, uh-oh, here comes trouble. And I remember like, okay, I could get attention from that. Like, oh, if I do bad things, they seem to pay attention to me. So I remember identifying as a little kid as like, oh, I'll be a troublemaker. And second thing, in this work that I've been doing, trying to uncover and discover a little bit more, had some good conversations with some relatives that were, around in the younger formative years of my life, from cradle to 3, 4, whatever. One thing that sticks out is, they told me like, your name wasn't Jay back then. Your name was God damn it, Jay. Everything, from your dad was just, that was your name. So I can just picture it, just kind of, having that reaction all the time. And it explains a lot. That's for darn sure.
So what was it like living with that?
It was really, really tough. If someone were to ask me, how would you describe your childhood? I would just say confusion and fear. Those are the 2 main things, because I just, I was always scared of something, but I was also confused because, I believed that I was born with like a bright soul and a good heart. It just felt like, a lot of things I did, I was getting in trouble for, not the bad things, but like I was trying to be a good kid. Mm-hmm. And I just remember like, my parents would be kind of these people, on the outside to all the outside people. And then in the home, it was just completely different. And as a kid, I couldn't quite, compute that. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And, little things happen that I remember, I gave a kid, I was probably, say, 2nd grade, something like that. Mm-hmm. A kid forgot his lunch money, so I gave him an extra quarter because I had one. And, I remember going to the dinner table that night. It's back when we actually had dinner at the table. And I brought it up like, oh, this is a really good thing. It felt good to help somebody else. And I remember I got screamed at and told that was a bad thing. And it's funny, the things that stick with you. Here I am, a 50-year-old man, and this is probably when I was 8.
So do you remember when you had your first taste of alcohol?
Yeah, I think I was either 13, late 13, early 14. I remember it. Ironically, it had the same sequence of events as my very last drunk. Yeah, it just ended up,
Did you black out? You blacked out from the first time you got drunk then?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So was that a pattern that repeated every time you got drunk?
Just about every time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you spent your life having to rely on other people to tell you what you did the night before?
Mostly, yeah.
Who's the comedian who said that blackouts are like time travel?
Going back to that feeling at the desk of that incomprehensible demoralization. I mean, yeah, I used to joke that it was time travel too. I had a million jokes for all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it was just so I couldn't feel. It was just the only thing I could tell myself. And, when I got to that dark point, I kind of ran out of those, those excuses to make. I ran out of the funnies. Nothing was a party foul anymore. It was just bad.
So were you a popular kid because you were willing to do the funny stuff and you were willing to get into trouble? What was your role as the adolescent/teenager moving into high school with regard to drinking?
Well, we moved from Michigan to Houston in between 4th and 5th grade. Yeah, I guess, if you were to ask somebody, they might remember me as, oh, yeah, he was a funny guy or something like that. I did like sports. I was pretty good with sports. the real kind of, event that happened shortly after we moved here is, my dad and mom split. What that looked like, it was like 6th or 7th grade. And just one morning I woke up and mom said, your dad's gone. And he was. And
did you have any inclination that might happen?
Looking back, I can see things. At the time, it was just, what are you talking about? Like, da 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 da. I mean, we could tell things weren't good. So as you know, you get to, become an adult yourself and then look at relationships. And, I was able to, look back and see that there was, there just wasn't any affection, any warmth, anything between the two of them. It was, okay. And my mom was an absolute wreck. Dad moved right in with a girlfriend, which she probably had before. And, here's what I remember, Howard, is just thinking like, all right, you know what? I've tried to be good. I've tried to do all this, da 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 da. It's not working out. I'm just going to really just, kind of rebel out here. And I think for the first couple of years, I got through junior high okay. But then high school hit and, somewhere in there, I just had the first drink and I changed immediately. I just said, okay, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. I quit all organized sports. My grades, which were mostly A's and some B's, just plummeted. And I just became a different person.
What kind of crowd were you hanging with before and after you became this rebel?
I was the type that I had a bunch of different kind of crowds of friends. I could be this person over here and this person over here. And I guess, a bit of a chameleon, but I do know this, like whatever group I was in, as, you hear a lot in the rooms, I never felt actually a part of.
How did the drinking work for you and in your favor?
It worked amazingly for me. It was the thing I've been looking for all my life. I used to jokingly from the early start, I called it my happy juice. I'm like, for the first time in my life, I'm ever happy. I'm ever free. This is the only thing that's ever made me feel good. When we were 16, my friends, geniuses, and myself, we found out we can get these fake IDs down at Woolworths downtown. They were like personal identification. And so we went down and got them, and there was a couple places they could work. And, I just remember thinking like, oh, this is amazing. I'm only 16. I'm able to go into this liquor store and actually get stuff. Like, this is just the greatest thing in the world. And went in and, got some beers, and I got some Jim Beam, and we were sitting with my friends in my my sweet high school car, my 1981 Cutlass with a big bench seat, and I had gotten this, big gulp of Coke or whatever, and I knew already to mix that with Jim Beam or whatever cheap stuff I could afford. And I remember my buddies were drinking beers, and they're like, man, wow, that's a lot you're drinking there. Why do you drink that or something? And I'm like, oh, you guys haven't figured it out. Like, this does the job quicker. Like, you don't have to drink as much and da 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 da. And I remember like thinking like, oh, I'm educating them. Like, they just don't know yet. They might've been looking at me like, oh boy. But here's what I remember about that. As I was doing that one time in the glug, 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 I asked myself, I was 16 years old, I wonder if I might be an alcoholic.
You're kidding. At 16?
At 16. I had known enough to know that both my grandfathers were alcoholics. My dad's dad, took that kind of to the end. I don't know the whole story, but my mom's dad, growing up, I had, two grandfathers. One was stay away from him. Like, just, wherever you are, wherever he is, just stay away. He's super angry. He's all this. The other one was like Superman. It was like one of the bright spots of my childhood is like somebody like, paid attention to me, talked to me, cared, all that kind of stuff. And, as a kid, you don't know, but turns out that grandfather, Grandpa Joe, had sobered up on my first birthday. And in AA, he was actually, I didn't find this out until after I got out of treatment. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
Mom, why didn't you share this with me before? This is good news. But yeah, he was up there for almost 20 years leading meetings and all that kind of stuff. And
When you were growing up,
yeah, and I had no idea.
how often did you see him?
Not often enough. We were kind of in the area and he was up there. So, but I just remember hearing before, like, oh, there's problems with alcohol in the family, da 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 da. So there I am, 16, thinking, I wonder if I'm an alcoholic, So for another 16, 17 years, that was always in the back of my head. And I just shoved it back with whatever coping mechanism that I could.
So you're drinking with your friends, you're in high school. Did you suffer any consequences either with school or driving or home life?
Yeah, there were a lot of them. I guess, thankfully nothing terrible. I didn't hurt anybody else or, I banged up a few cars, got in some trouble at school. I was in a lot of trouble at school all the time. There was quite a bit of consequences. Went to jail a couple times, but always kind of somehow got out of it or whatever. But
did you ever put two and two together? The drinking versus the consequences?
No. Freshman year of college, I somehow pulled it together enough to make it into a college. And freshman year, of course, get busted with sneaking beer into the dorm or whatever it was. So they sent us to like alcohol awareness program, like you go 3 days or something like that. It wasn't AA, it was just, I don't know, some kind of awareness thing they were trying in the mid-90s. And I remember the whole time thinking like, this is BS. Like I should not be here. Like I look back on that and I just think like, oh, I had no clue. I was not putting those two things together whatsoever quite yet.
What was the rest of your college career like?
It was a party. Yeah. It was a 5.5 year long party. I am not a doctor. It's interesting because I really enjoyed college, but there was a lot of highs and a lot of lows. Like I knew that, partying was definitely something that, I love to do and everything was kind of wrapped around it. I did get good enough grades to eventually graduate. But yeah, there was a lot of lows. I just drank and I took it past the limit. And, I've had a lot of, behavioral things that, again, discovered later in life that, really were coming into effect. I remember my freshman year, getting upset about something. I punched the window. And this is an old dorm room, so it was just the old, pane glass. And of course, so, my hand cuts open, there's blood spurting everywhere. And, I was already drunk. I left. Friends were like, what's wrong with you? And I left and, I was already in a blackout mode. And I remember, waking up in my car in a park. And I looked over and, the sun was coming up and I see blood just all over my hand, all over, the door. And I'm like, what happened? Like, it was another one of those, what happened? And so I drove back and, my dorm mate was sitting there and I remember him like calling somebody. He's like, yeah, he made it back. And then my friends came over and I remember they just kind of all came in and they were looking at me and they're like shaking their head. And I was like, they've been out all night looking for me, guys, girls, and all this kind of stuff. And I just, incomprehensible demoralization. I couldn't say anything. Like there was nobody I felt like I could talk to that like, like what is wrong? I just kept thinking, what is wrong with me? I don't understand. Like,
So there were obviously people around you who cared about you. You had friends, it sounds like, people who went out to look for you. And what were you telling yourself about having a problem at that point?
Man, that denial sure runs deep, doesn't it? Yeah, I think I just, just kept picking myself up, dusting myself off, just, oh yeah, I just made up some excuse, and, I think I probably lost a lot of friends along the way, the smart ones. And, I think if we were to look back, they're like, yeah, man, that dude had some problems. And I did, and here's a thought that popped up, something I heard in the program. For me, this rings true is that, for all the bad that came with alcohol, I look back at it now and think like that saved my life. I likely would have been another suicide statistic. So it carried me through long enough to get in here and, just start the journey. So
walk me down the path from getting out of college to the point that we get to this party. What were the next number of years like for you, and what were you doing with regard to your drinking?
So that was pretty interesting, because what I noticed then was that a lot of my friends had, we got out of the party school scene and they were kind of settling down, married or whatnot. And I had money, I had more than pocket change, I got into sales, big surprise, and, started making a little bit of money, and I was like, wow, like I can afford to do this more. So my partying actually ramped up after college. So from there until kind of entering the treatment center, it was a good 5-6 year stretch in there. I remember out mountain biking with a friend one day, and, terribly hungover, and he was not. And I just remember going through those woods, and I didn't have the energy I used to have. And I just remember kind of stopping at one point and, thinking about talking to a God of some sort, like, man, this is not good.
What had your relationship with the higher power been like?
Any kind of religion just wasn't really, existent in our family. We like we were maybe Presbyterians. Yeah. So I just kind of grew up believing that there was something, but I didn't know what it was. And then, little troublemaker. And at some point I remember thinking like, hey, if there's something out there, like he or she is not working for me. Like, I'm already on the wrong side of the tracks.
While you were engaging in all the behavior that was causing the problem.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I had a high school friend and his parents were real religious. And
to what degree was that message of maybe I'm an alcoholic? How often did that come up for you?
Not often. But, just little periodic things, that it would pop up.
Yeah. So you were a successful sales guy. You were making enough money. What kind of lifestyle did you have?
Well, I was just a single guy, there for a while. It was just, it was just narcissistic. It was just me. Yeah. So, I was doing pretty well in the career and all that kind of stuff, but it was just solely to support me and go have fun with friends and take vacations or whatever. But, that period right there, like you said earlier, you're just like, hey, how come I seem to be doing the same thing as these friends, but, do they wake up and want to die every morning? Like, do they have the same consequences I do? It doesn't appear that way. I'm like, why am I so different? So I just remember a lot of confusion. And then, of course, the last couple years when I just announced to everybody that I was taking a health break, but really I just was going deeper and deeper every night. When I came into the program, I learned a lot of things. One that, this is a disease. And that was a big one for me because I had no idea. And I just thought like, oh, I'm just weak. Like everybody else can handle their own stuff. I'm just weak. So that was a very helpful thing. The second part of the first step, our lives to become unmanageable. I really got to take a look at how much I was putting into managing my life. And what I mean by that is I had a plan.
Yeah.
Right. And my plan was, okay, I need to avoid all the embarrassing things that I've been doing. I was a horrible drunk dialer. I just love to have cocktails and then call people and tell them all the wonderful things that I think, friends, girlfriends, ex-girl, whoever. And the worst part about that was, I'd see somebody the next day or two and, hey man, how you been? I haven't talked to you in a while. They're like, dude, we talked for like 30 minutes last night. Oh yeah, that was you. Ha, I'm just kidding. Embarrassing, incomprehensible demoralization. So how does an alcoholic manage that? I made sure to only place phone calls on this one cordless phone that I had that showed all your outgoing calls. So in the morning, I would get up and look and see who I called. So that way, if I ran into them, I wouldn't have that embarrassing conversation. And I think back on that, Howard, I look back, I'm like, oh my God, that was a lot of work.
Wasn't that kind of scary to know going into it that you were going to black out?
That's what I mean. I was preparing for it. And this wasn't like once a week. This was daily. This was my daily routine.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, like the Dish Network satellite TV first came out, and one of them had the first recordable little hard drive thing. So you could record your shows. Anything I wanted to watch after 8 o'clock, I recorded, because I already knew I was going to be so drunk by then that I wouldn't remember anything. So I had this huge long list of programs that I recorded because I knew by 8 o'clock I'd be too drunk. And then I heard about Life's Become Unmanageable. It became very clear to me, like, I was trying to manage my drinking, but man, it was getting so much worse and worse.
What were your romantic relationships like during this period, and how were they affected by the alcohol?
Yeah, of course it affected, the drinking, part of it, not so much but just the repressed person inside that, I had some great women in my life that all really wanted to love or did love me. I had no idea how to return it back. I see that now, having gone through the steps several times. I didn't so much have relationships as I took hostages. It's never any, physical stuff per se, but, it was a lot of emotional abuse. It was a lot of repeat the pattern, find the pretty girl, feed my ego. People think well of me. Once they got to know me, and I had this, like, it was a very sick, once they did love me, then I had this thing where I'm like, well, if they do, then there's something wrong with them. So then I would start to push them away. And then, once they finally got the message or wisened up or whatever the case and said, okay, I'm out of here, then, of course, I go into fix-it mode. Oh, no, you have to come back. And I would try everything to repair the relationship. And then sometimes I'd get them back and I'd do the same darn thing. It was this really gross pattern and cycle that, I caused a lot of pain out there.
So once you lost them, then did you go into this period of anger or grief? What were the feelings after you lost them over your own behavior?
Well, a lot more alcohol to pour on top of it to, anesthetize anything that felt like a real feeling. I was scared of any kind of feeling. I mean, I look back on my first year of recovery and, the people say, oh, the first year is a gift. Well, when I was in it, it was not a gift. It was just awful, but you know how it is. And you look back in retrospect, it was beautiful in so many ways, because I remember moments of being in a meeting and I felt this emotion. I'm like, oh, that's what that's like. I've heard about that. Like, oh, wow. Like, wait, I'm actually happy for someone else. And like, there's nothing in it for me. Like, wait, oh, I just repressed all my feelings, like basically all my life.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing and meaningful way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. While you're there, enhance your program with another audiobook I produced, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Listen to a free sample of Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book or in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along. You're gonna love it. And we're back. I did therapy before I did AA. Before I got sober, I'd done therapy for a number of years. Did you seek any help prior to getting sober?
Oh, yes. Right before I got sober, I went to see a therapist to treat what I thought was anxiety. One of the many things that we tell ourselves before we come to reality. But that lady, I don't remember her name, but she gave me the first copy of the Big Book that I had ever seen. I didn't even know what it was. And she said, you might find some answers in here. And I remember I took it home, started to read it one night. I remember standing in my bedroom, and I don't remember what page it was, but basically it just talked about, the alcoholic death. And there's a reason I tell newcomers to read the book with a sponsor, a translator who can help you understand this, because I saw it and I saw, doomed to an alcoholic death. And I literally dropped the book. And I just remember thinking, I'm screwed. I'm so screwed.
So you gave up based on what the book said.
Yeah, basically. That would be a good excuse. It wasn't long after that, though, that I think I had an annual physical with my GP. And, this guy, so I'm in my 20s, and flashback to college. I remember going to the doctor a couple times, and I think I was trying to I was trying to reach out to in college for help, because I knew, I just had these massive, massive problems, and I didn't know what to do, and alcohol was the only thing I knew, but that caused me more problems. And I remember trying to talk to him a couple times, but it probably wasn't even forthcoming. What's a general physician going to do anyway? But I remember telling one, man, I don't know what to do. And he probably referred me to a therapist that I never went to. But what I remember is on the intake form, how are you feeling? This and this. How many drinks per week? And I remember sitting there going, oh, I wonder if I should be on it. Okay, let's see. Monday night, Tuesday night. It was 80. And I'm oh, if I write 80 on here, that's not going to be good. But I'm that was kind of a wake up call. So, that was in college. Anyway, so flash forward to, before, treatment, therapist, anxiety, first copy of the Big Book, and went in for another annual physical. And, I was doing physicals often in my 20s. The doctor, I remember asking me a couple times, he's like, why do you need all these tests? You're a healthy young man. And I'm I always like to sound responsible. And what I was doing, Howard, is I was secretly hoping that he would come back and say, Jay, we got your test. Your liver is failing. You must stop drinking today. Mm-hmm. Thinking that would be, okay, this is what I need. I was searching for something that would help. What happened instead was he said, man, have you ever thought about AA? And I was ooh, maybe. And, my uncle's voice came into my head from hanging around at beer parties, AA is for wussies. He didn't say wussy, but, I was I think I was just old enough to kind of have those voices behind me. I was just I might try that. And I went home, and I remember, phone books. We still had those back then. And, I found the AA clubs in there. I circled them. Every day I thought about it, oh, I'm just going to go to one of these places. But I didn't know the first thing about it, other than what I'd seen on TV and movies or whatever. But I just knew, okay, there's a solution. And on this coffee table, I had all my solutions. I'd come home every night and drink. So there was my big solution, a big drink right here. On the end of my coffee table, there was a bunch of self-help books, because I was going to find out what was wrong with me in there. There was a Remington 12 gauge, which seemed to be an option at some nights. And then there was that phone book with, the AA circled. And I remember going home every night, okay, which one's it going to be? And, I just got to the point where it was one of these is going to be the answer. And once it does. And what happened was I knew this one guy in my field who had quit drinking a few years before, and I remember him as a wild party guy. And I was well, he just might know a little bit about this AA thing. So, called around, got his number, and he knew me from my dad. And next thing you know, we're having lunch. He starts to explain a little bit about me, and I'm just oh, that's it. I'm in. How do I join this thing? He's well, you could go to meetings, you could try treatment. And I'm oh, I got to do treatment. I know I got to do it. And I just remember sitting at that lunch, filled with some kind of like a little bit of hope that I hadn't had in like so long.
Mm-hmm.
I went home, started calling treatment centers, got drunk while I was doing it because I was so happy I had to get drunk.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And, I was in a blackout again, but I'd apparently talked to enough people at the treatment center and like somehow got in. The journey began from there.
Uh-huh. And how old were you at that point?
29.
Was this a residential treatment program?
Residential, yeah. So it was the full 28 days.
Followed by intensive outpatient?
Mm-hmm.
For what, 6 weeks?
Well, probably I would say that's the normal course of thing, except, I got in there and my last like big, huge spree before that was very first ever Houston Texans inaugural game against the Dallas Cowboys. It was September of 2002. We went, we had a blast, don't remember any of it except for I burned the back of my leg on this grill out tailgating. And someone told me to put mustard on it that would help it. So, I probably needed to go to the hospital. But I had this huge burn on my calf with mustard on it. Like, these are the solutions that I had, Howard.
Right.
3 days later, it seemed like it was all kind of a blur, really. I wake up in this treatment center, kind of look around. I'm like, oh my God, how did I get here?
Had you checked yourself in a blackout?
I actually, did the drunk dialing thing. I called a bunch of friends. I think I was thinking it was like my farewell tour or something. And I didn't know anything. They all told me later. But I actually called my dad and stepmom, and it was like 2 a.m. and I'm like, I need help. Can you take me? And, to their credit, they did. They came and got me. And, I remember sitting in the back of their Toyota Avalon, just pounding beers and, kind of took me in. They don't like it when you just kind of show up, I think, unannounced at like 3 a.m., but somehow they took me in. And anyway, a couple of days later, I came to in there. When I came to, I remember like feeling like, okay, I made it to get some help. I'm finally doing something to get some help. I don't know what this looks like. I'm scared shitless, but I'm finally doing something and this feels okay. And so it kind of felt like I, reached home base a little bit, and I'm like, okay, I got here and I didn't die. Like, that is a major accomplishment. Right about then, the nurse says, hey, you have a phone call up here. And so I walked to the little station, and, it was my dad and stepmom on the line. And they're like, hey, we've been thinking about it. We've been talking about it. We don't think that you need to be in there. You probably just need to like see a therapist. And I remember just kind of, resonating with that. And, there's a part of me that wanted to agree, like, yeah, oh my God, I overreacted. But the overwhelming part of me was like, I think I said, hey, I respect what you're, where you're coming from, but like, I think this is the best for me. A lot of that I've processed over the years is, there's tons of alcoholism. There was tons of alcohol in my family, but there was really, other than one grandfather, no solution. So it was, we don't go get help. Nobody does that. And looking back, I think, that was a lot of their own stuff. This isn't a blame thing. This is just my story. I remember, starting to go into meetings and hear people talking about like, oh yeah, this is my 4th treatment. Yeah. My parents told me this is the last one, and they're hopeful for me and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, is anybody else parents telling them not to get help?
Right.
What? This is really weird. So, that coupled with, you hear all kinds of things in treatment, and, a couple of people are like, oh man, you don't look that bad. You're not an alcoholic. And I'm like, oh, sweet. Maybe I'm not. So I think at the time I kind of thought of myself as like, okay, I'm alcoholic light.
Yeah.
I really loved the fellowship. I loved the meetings.
Are you talking about the AA meetings that were in the treatment center?
In the treatment center, yeah.
Okay, because they have a large alumni group, don't they, that brings meetings back?
Yeah, because I was shocked. I was like, wow, these people are saying things that are my inside thoughts that I did not know you could say outside. And it was fascinating. The honesty was just riveting. I go back to the child just always confused and fearful. I was like, oh, we can actually talk about these things. It was miraculous in a way.
Obviously, the treatment center is going to want you to go to AA after you get out. But while you're in treatment, going to AA meetings, what was your feeling about the connection between treatment and AA, the separate nature of the two processes?
You know, it was all new to me, so it was all a learning process. But I do remember, like, the lunchtime meetings, you know, there'd be some alumni that would, you know, come back and pop in for a meeting. And it was like, I remember looking at them thinking like, oh, wait, they're not in here. Because it was a smaller treatment center at that time. So you knew everybody. And I remember thinking, who are these people? And then finding out like, oh, they've already been in here and they're coming back. And I remember thinking, what a bunch of losers. They must have nothing else to do. Like, why would you come back to a hospital? Like, it made no sense to me. You know, then I started to see in big Friday night meetings, and there was a lot of joy and laughter. And, you know, so I started to get it a little bit more at that point. So I kind of went through that thinking like, okay, here's my solution. Yet I think I can still party a little bit. And I remember, you know, they elected me the alumni president or the group president, like my last week there. And, you know, I think I wore that as a badge of pride, and find out later it just means you're the biggest nut in the nut house. And so I kind of had this like, oh, okay, well, I know the talk now. And what I didn't do was, you know, that little mustard seed of a thought that like, oh, I can drink again. You know, I didn't talk to anybody about that. I did my release program, and, you know, they gave you the meeting guide, and they said, you know, here's all the meetings, you know, pick out one for each day. And I remember I wrote down 2, and my counselor came over and she looked at it and she's like, you know, why do you only have 2 on there? And I was like, oh, I'm not going to need all those. And I just remember the look she gave me, like.
Did she straighten you out on that, or she let you go with the 2?
She probably tried to talk to me, and I probably didn't listen. Is probably what happened. Anyway, but what did happen is I got out of there and drank the very next day. And, you know, came back a day later, licking my wounds as a now loser alumni. And I remember, like, she's looking at me, and I'm getting my desire chip, and, you know, it's kind of, you know, she wasn't surprised at all.
You went back into treatment then? No, you just came back?
No, I just came back as kind of this is all a big blur. So you mentioned the aftercare. So I was coming back for that. But I was, you know, I kept resetting my sobriety date. Like, I had so many dates, I didn't know which end was which. So I'd come back to my facilitator, and first thing you do is write down a little book your date. And I was like, oh, shit, what did I write last week? Because I couldn't remember the last lie I told. And so it was just a big thing of that. And, you know, so I was coming back, I was acting like I was still sober, but I wasn't. Sometimes I'd get a desire chip, sometimes I wouldn't. It was just this big facade that I was putting on, thinking that anybody actually cared. It was just, you know, obviously just me. And, you know, so I did that for about 9 months and collected, I don't know, 15, 16 desire chips somewhere along the way. I loved the program. I loved the people. It was so interesting and all that. I would pick meetings to get desire chips in which I thought like nobody I would know would be there. The old club, the smoky one. And sure enough, you always run into somebody who knows. And, you know, I thought people cared, you know, still it's just so self-centered. Anyway, so I go to this men's meeting at 12:15. You know, I knew the regular guys there, and I was getting desire chips there like almost every week. At one point, you know, there was over a dozen guys in that room, you know, like I got up to get another one, and there was like a single clap in the back, and it was a kind of a guy that was new and didn't know me. And I remember thinking like, I'm screwed. Like, these people aren't even clapping for me anymore. I'm in so much trouble.
Yeah. So most treatment centers, they do a lot of indoctrination with the AA program. Steps will be worked. There will be a requirement to get a sponsor before you leave. There will be some kind of interaction with between the treatment center and the AA program to aid in that transition. Did you have a sponsor at any point, and were you using them? What did that look like?
Oh yeah. I did get a sponsor, and the same guy that I had the lunch with, and bless him, man. He had so much patience. I don't know why he kept me, because I just, you know, I remember one time, you know, calling him up after another bender, and he's like, well, why didn't you call me before? I'm like, because you would have talked me out of it. And he's like, congratulations, it's the first honest thing you've
Wow.
said, So, I mean, he stuck with me through a lot of that stuff and helped me tremendously, and he's still a good friend today.
So when did it finally stick for you? At what point did you finally get to the realization that you needed to stop once and for all? Did you have to hit a bottom to do that? Did you get off the elevator sooner? What did that look like?
So that same sponsor, Phil L.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in a long time.
He tricked me and told me he had a business meeting for advertising and marketing at this place. Sat and met this guy.
Right.
I think we talked marketing needs for a minute, and then next thing you know, it was about like Jay's needs, and Jay can't stay sober.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we have all these programs here to help. And within 10 minutes from there, I was meeting Mary B, who scared the ever-loving crap out of me. Could see right through me, right through my BS, but it was enough to, finally like, okay, I'm going to do this. And, like a good alcoholic, I was asking for help, but then I was telling him all the reasons I couldn't do it. One of which was like, oh, this is an expensive program. I can't afford it. Well, there might be some scholarship help for you. Another one was, well, this is a family program. I have no family. I'm not married. My parents won't come to this. And they're like, well, don't worry about that. I was trying to tell her like, this wouldn't work for me. Cause she's like, well, let me ask you, do you want to have a family one day? I'm like, well, sure. Do you want this? Yeah, sure. Would you like an opportunity to break the cycle of everything that's come down into your life for your kids?
Right.
And I was like, whoa, this lady's deep. Like that got me. So I signed up. A part of the stipulation of my scholarship was that I not drink. I know it's crazy. So, I signed a piece of paper, if I drank, I was out and that kind of thing. First couple of weeks of this, it was intensive outpatient, and it was 4 nights a week. And, I still see some faces in the rooms today from back then. And I remember the counselors trying to get me to open up, and I would just sit there and just grip this chair, and I'd look at the ends of my knuckles, and they were white. And I was just determined. Like I didn't want to talk. I was just so full of fear. And I would leave there, and we got out around 8:45, usually on most nights, which worked well for me because there was a little liquor store, and I could leave there and go get liquor and then drink it. And, by the time I even hit the West Loop, I had a buzz on. So then I'd have to come back and pretend that, I hadn't been drinking. And I did that for about 3 weeks before who later on became my wife. She had participated in a little bit of the Al-Anon portion of that, in which I understand they told her her greatest suggestion is to run. And she probably should have taken that suggestion when they found out we weren't married. But she ratted me out. Probably, now that I think about it, the greatest gift she ever gave me.
So you were married by this point?
No. We were just dating. It was newly dating, too.
Newly dating. So you brought this woman that you were newly dating into this situation?
Well, it was more like, hey, I got to do this family thing. I'm trying to not drink again. Would you, any interest in joining, So she said yes. And, but I was having her cover up my lies because she knew I was drinking. And I'm like, you can't tell anybody because I'll get kicked out of there. Well, after like 3 weeks, I guess she had enough or something happened, and she narked on me. And another counselor came and got me out of group and pulled me into the room and said, have you been drinking? And I remember like kind of leaning forward and going up to like start, which is what I knew how to do best, which is just lie and say one of the 50 things that might come out of my mouth. Well, who told you that? Well, no, that's not, Instead, the oddest thing happened, which is I feel like I literally ran out of lies. And I just looked at her and I said, yes. And I got this sense of relief that was new to me. And she then said, well, and I'm like, so how does this work? Am I out? And she's like, well, I think the first thing you need to do is go tell your group. And I'm like, oh God, no. So she's like, well, if you want to stay in, this might be a start. So we went in and I had to tell the whole group, which at the time was devastating because, Howard, we had been together 3 whole weeks.
Right.
So, yeah, we were tight.
Yeah.
And, I just said, yeah, guys, I'm in lying to you. I'm still drinking. They said whatever they said, kind of no big deal. That was May 29th, 2003. That's still my current sobriety date. And that was the day I literally felt like I ran out of lies. I ran out of all those things I could tell everybody and tell myself.
Huh.
And that was, interestingly, the one sobriety date. I've got an old AA book with a bunch of different dates written on the sides. That's what you did in treatment. Crossed out another one. Yeah. It's the one that I didn't plan. Because I used to try to plan, like, oh, I'll get sober on April Fool's Day because that'll be fitting. I always tried to plan my sobriety. It's the one I didn't try to plan, and it's the one I still have today.
So that was your moment of clarity then, sitting there with her, running out of lies. Did you feel any kind of divine intervention during that period, or was it that's just where your mind went?
I think I was, since I came into the program, only had about 9 months from the very first meeting to that moment, which of course felt like 5 years when I was trying to keep up the charade. From the first time I came in, I had heard about, Bill Wilson's white light moment. So I've been seeking that. I never got that because I think God knew, maybe I wouldn't know what to do with it. So no, I didn't associate with it. I remember I felt some relief, some shame a little bit, but relief mostly. Did I think that day I walked out and that would be my last drink ever? No, but something happened. Something shifted inside me. I did not recognize it at the time. It was only looking back.
You'd mentioned something about 9 months in AA. Were you still going to AA meetings at this point while you were drinking? Were you getting desire chips after every time you drank?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Yeah.
That's tough sitting in an AA meeting knowing that you're the guy in the room who's still drinking, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that did not feel good. It is completely true that a head full of AA and a belly full of whiskey do not mix.
So did you go back into the outpatient part of that program?
Well, yeah, they let me stay, and I continued another 2-3 months or whatever, and that's when it all really kicked in.
So the sponsor you were working with, did you start working on the steps in earnest at that point? How long did it take you to get to your 4th step and then your 8th and 9th?
Yeah, we started working on them pretty diligently. I think I was, maybe 6 months in, and we were on step 9 or 10. And what I remember about that was he said, all right, it's time for you to start sponsoring other people. And I just started laughing. I'm like, oh, wait, haha, I don't have anything to give anybody. And he literally, we were like after a big meeting, kind of said, this guy over here needs help. And he kind of grabbed my elbow and pulled me over and introduced me to him. And to this day, I'm so grateful that he did that. I don't know if I've ever done that. Who knows? But I started talking to that guy, and he didn't last long. But then I got another sponsee, and then that started. I can tell you unequivocally, the only reason I'm sitting across from you right now at 18 years continuous sobriety is because I got into sponsoring. There's just no way that my self-centered personality, whatever, would have stayed the course this long if I had not gotten into sponsoring other guys. And then gotten to see guys like yourself and many others did the same thing, and then realized that is the key to long-term contented sobriety.
I've seen you over the years with those sponsees in the same meetings, guys who you sponsor and then guys that they sponsor. It's so cool to see that lineage continuing. So you found sponsorship was the service connection for you to staying engaged and in the middle of the program.
Absolutely. It was maybe, I didn't put this together till now, but it was me at 8 years old, recognizing the feelings of how good it feels to help someone else.
Giving the kid a quarter.
Yeah, and then flash forward all these, I remember driving home one time after doing some steps with a guy, and I just had this natural, unbelievable feeling that didn't come from alcohol or anything else. And I was like, wow, this is it.
That's the God moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that was the closest I might have come to, the white light type moment. But I just remember it was a natural, great feeling. And, I'm real clear on a few things, though. It's my blessing that I get to sponsor people. I just, the way I look at it is, all right, God put us both here. I've been through these steps. You haven't. Here's this amazing instruction manual. We're going to open it up, invite God in, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
I can't predict, if you will stay sober. You can't predict if I can, but, so far this has been working for me, and it's a blessing. And, it has nothing to do with me in terms of, these aren't my sponsees. This is just a gift that God gave me.
Yeah.
And a message that flows through me. And if it helps somebody, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. I can't predict that. But I will say that to your point, a great feeling of satisfaction is after I get somebody through their steps, and invariably they always ask the same question, can we start them again? I said, yes, you can, but with somebody else. It's your time. So when I'm driving into a meeting and see one of my sponsees working with somebody else, it warms my heart. It's not about me, but it just warms my heart that, somehow God uses all of us and just is interconnected for those that are ready to hear the message.
Yeah. And that's a great realization to have and to keep foremost in your mind. For me, it is that I have to remember whatever service work I'm doing with regard to sponsorship, they have their role, I have my role, God is directing that play. I'm not. And if they go out and get drunk, I've done the best I can. I cannot take responsibility for their sobriety. They can't take they can't assess blame on me. It just doesn't work that way. There's 18 years between your last drink and today, almost 19 years in May. Lots happened during your sobriety, and I wondered if you would touch upon a few of the milestones in your sobriety, either the bad times you got through using your Alcoholics Anonymous program, the good times as a result of staying sober and being a sober man.
Yeah, well, at 10 years, it was definitely my turn in the barrel. That girlfriend that didn't run ended up becoming, wife and had two beautiful kids. But at about 10 years, the marriage was falling apart. Right in the middle of all that, I get a call, my dad's dying of cancer. And then at the same time, a bunch of really bad stuff is going down at work. So it was like, I've always been okay with physical pain, like it's going to hurt, you get better, but emotional pain I just ran from. That was the most intense period of emotional pain I have ever had. And you saw me, and a number of guys saw me in this room. It was about 40 pounds lighter, believe it or not.
You were frazzled.
Oh, man, it was just, I kind of look at it a lot of different ways. I've got a lot of gratitude because knowing I could go through all that and make it out the other side and having so many guys that, just came and put their arms around me. I mean, there was about a period of 6 months of just intense pain. Then strength comes from all that. A lot of really good things have happened.
Did you ever feel like taking a drink around that time?
Yeah. So when it first became very evident that the marriage was dissolving, there was one night where I was in my study trying to sleep on the floor with a sleeping blanket, and I could not sleep. It was about 3 a.m. I remembered my wife had kept some Modelo's in the back fridge, and there might have been a little champagne or something. And I just remember thinking, well, I got to do it because, like my circumstances, like everyone will understand if I do this.
Yeah.
So I remember I sat up, and my next thought was, no, she might take this, but the one thing that nobody will ever get is my sobriety date.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the next thought I had. And I got up shortly after, and I drove to a meeting, and I grabbed a guy and, for the meeting, and I was like, hey, can we talk? And I just completely bawled everything out to him. And ever since then, I never even had a thought about having a drink to get through that.
Yeah, what a powerful experience.
So that wasn't me. I moved my feet and I did the work, but I think it was everything I had done up until then, that gave me just enough strength to be able to make or have a thought like that even come into my head,
It was like a God moment for you, wasn't it?
Totally.
So all that happened at around 10 years with the divorce, or how did you get through that?
I got a little apartment on North Lane because it was directly halfway between club, a lot of meetings, and a church that I attended. So I figured if I was in between these two things, I just might make it. So I was doing 3 meetings a day, starting off, at the early morning, midday, and then going over to the church and doing stuff. And basically, I just never stopped moving my feet.
And when people hear that, especially people who don't know whether or not they can get through a tough time, your father, did he pass away?
He ended up, he passed real quick. So it happened in the middle of all that, which, by the way, divorce is way more painful than death. You know why?
Why?
Because when people die, they don't do that to you.
Okay.
It's true.
I'll remember that one. So you got through all this by virtue of the work that you were doing. I remember you at the time, you were definitely holding on to the center of the program. I see you at a lot of meetings. We'd have lunch. So you got through all that. That's all behind you. Anything else that happened in the next 8 or 9 years going into the present moment?
Lots. I guess I'll tell this because it's more present day. So this just happened. I talked a little bit earlier about that mustard seed of a thought in which, maybe I can drink again. I feel like I tried everything, every which way to still be, able to successfully drink. I feel like I have a Ph.D. in relapsing. Yeah. Which is a great strength of mine. So I know how all that works. This popped up 2 days ago. I had some oral surgery, and it was quite extensive. So they told me they're going to have to put me under. I told them, hey, I've got, some addiction issues. Don't give me any of the good stuff. And
right.
So, had a pretty good plan going into it. So this is literally 2 days ago. Went in for that, had a friend pick me up. As we were leaving, I was high as a kite. Yeah. And I remember coming out of there and just feeling so unbelievably good. Oh, I missed this. And we're driving over to the pharmacy, and I'm having these thoughts that I hadn't had in a long time. Here was thought number one. This feeling is so good. It's probably going to wear off pretty soon. I wonder if I asked this friend to take me to a liquor store, what they would say. I wonder if I can get to the pharmacy and tell them that my doctor made a mistake and that, I shouldn't have ibuprofen. Give me some of the good stuff. I wonder if that guy who I see at meetings that's always relapsing, I don't have a drug dealer. I wonder if he knows people. I wonder if I called him. This is all in the span of an hour, coming out of this, local anesthesia. Wow. And it was a beautiful day. I cranked the windows down. I put shades on, and I was like, turn the music like I was in that let's go, like party mode that I hadn't felt that in a long time. And, we get to the pharmacy. They're not ready to go over to Starbucks. And, I'm just high as a kite sitting in this front seat. It wears off pretty quick, and, got home and took a nap and woke up, and everything was coming back to me. And I'm like, and Howard, what happened was those feelings scared me. I have a healthy fear of relapsing and not taking care of my sobriety. It's so much so that my biggest enemy was not talking about it and thinking, I'm good, I got this, nothing to see here. Pride and ego could have helped step in the way of old friend of mine, Sandy. She had relapsed after a long time and gave me the lesson of, it doesn't matter if people think bad about you. What matters is your sobriety. Right. Actually, it wasn't even a relapse. She just, had thought about drinking, and people are afraid to say that. Yeah. So anyway, what do? I take all that, and thankfully, physically, I felt well enough. So I go to a Friday night meeting around the corner from here and grab the leader and say, hey, man, if you got any openings for burning desires, I got one. And sure enough, he called on me, and I just kind of told the same story I told you. And I said, look, I'm here, okay. I'm fine right now. But what I learned is whenever I have those ideas in my head that a liquor store starts to sound good, the number one positive thing I can do is talk about it and get that idea and thought out there, take the power out of it. And I basically said, probably a couple people in this room that think like, oh my God, what's wrong with him? Like, I don't care. I really don't. I just want to stay sober.
So I would have been getting a call from you earlier today saying you couldn't do this interview because you'd gotten drunk if you had followed through.
You're right. Absolutely. Actually, you probably wouldn't have gotten a call at all. You'd be like, where's Jay?
Oh, that's great. What a great way to, put a bow on this whole thing, because here you are, you had this opportunity, you were right in the midst of it, and there was still a part of you that, because of all the AA that you've done over the years, that knew what to do with that. and that intuitive thought or decision that came, I'm a firm believer that the intuitive thought or decision gets fed by the continual application of the program to our everyday lives, right?
Yep.
The fact that you were able to do that is, I mean, it's amazing for one thing, given the power of the disease, especially when you're getting a taste of it. Because I've had a couple of major operations, and I remember waking up and having that same feeling and still having to realize, wait a second, I'm still an alcoholic here. I'm still an alcoholic. This feels really, really good. Of course, you feel really good, and then it wears off, and then the pain is just outrageous. So there's no really big payoff at the end of it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. But it was a good reminder that the beast is still in me.
That's a great thing for us to remember. It's a good thing for us to end on. You've been a big part of my sobriety for a long time, Jay. I love you, and you're a good man. And I really appreciate the fact that this message has been so powerful that we don't know who it's going to help. The podcast is being listened to all over. I don't know who's listening, but somewhere along the way, somebody's going to hear something you said, and it's going to resonate. And I just love that about your story. To hear it all together like this, it's just been a real treat for me. So I want to thank you a million for doing this.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? It's another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.